back to Fantasy Friday. So, last week we saw Maniye and Hesprec take off into the wild, and Broken Axe was sent in pursuit. So, that's a little bit scary for Maniye, because she is terrified of him since he is the man who killed her mother. And over in the south, we saw Asmander and Venator fight off some lions, and they're going to be doing their own thing now. So today we're going to be reading chapters 9 and 10, and we're not going to be paying any attention to Asmander or Venator in the south this time. It's all going to be focused around Maniye. So let's see what happens there. Here we are with chapter number 9. What surprised Maniye was how well she could run. For all her life she had been tethered to Akrit's hall and to the scatter of mounds that was the village of the winter runners. At best she had gone as far as the tree line perhaps, or ventured between the fields and pens that spread out beyond the mounds. She had never known what it was like just to run, to give her paws free rein and let them tear up the miles. The wolf inside her knew, though. It had been born to the wilds, and, from the first time she had stepped, those wilds had been planted in her like a yearning that grew and grew. She had the best of both worlds. A true wolf would have felt the cold far more, but she had swallowed up 3 layers of wool and deer hide when she stepped, and carried that extra warmth with her, husbanding her strength rather than spending it profligately on fighting the chill. If she had been traversing the forest on 2 feet, with only the senses of a human girl to aid her, then she would have become lost very swiftly, gone in circles and never known it until her father's people caught up with her. The wolf in her could not get lost. Her nose was the gateway to a world of 1,000,000 clues, where every tree was a wealth of information to navigate by. With each inhaled breath, the world told her where north was, with the promise of snow borne on white wings. She knew instantly the paths her mute brothers, the wolves, used when they first crossed the forest, and knew to avoid them. She knew where the boars had rooted, where the deer had run. Her nose marked where the owl had stooped and the sinuous track the marten made. She knew the grave of every mouse, the buried hordes of squirrels. Every moment told its story, and all those myriad stories joined together in her mind to weave a picture of countless threads, telling her exactly where she was and which way she must go. She never ventured deep into the forest, but kept the edge of the trees at the periphery of her attention, hiding from view and yet cutting the shortest path. Sometimes she forgot the burden on her back that no natural wolf would bear. Sometimes, for short spaces, she even forgot what she was running from. The running had become an end in itself. She surprised small animals, even birds. She killed a young deer, bursting out on it in a moment of mutual surprise, and then lunging forwards, hooking her teeth into its haunches and tasting the sudden salt rush of blood. She brought it down in a furious struggle, clumsy and panicking at first, but then, riding her instinct to rip at the kicking beast's throat. Afterwards, her wolf jaws fed ravenously while her human mind commended her praised soul to its totem to be reborn anew, perhaps as a mute beast again, or perhaps as one of the deer's tribe. As she ate, Hesprec Essenskis slithered from her back and stepped into his old human bones. She regarded him warily, because, if he wanted to talk, she might have to join him in that shape, and she did not want to. The wolf was warmer than the girl might have been. The wolf was freer, too. He tore himself a little meat, in tiny scraps that he could swallow raw, certainly nothing that he might have needed to chew. What he ate would not have sated a stoat, and yet it seemed to be enough for him. Perhaps the serpent in him needed little sustenance, slim as it was. After she was fed, and resisting the sudden urge to find somewhere to curl up, she whined at him urgently. He was squatting on his heels, watching her thoughtfully, apparently just as grateful as she not to resume their sparring of before. Now he stepped once more, back to that little sliver of sliding shadow that must be the smallest snake he could become. This time, taking his place in her pack, his cold, ridged body climbed up her flank to get there. This did not seem as objectionable as she had expected, and, once he was in place, his weight between her shoulder blades was almost familiar. Perhaps she would have missed it, had he been left behind. She followed her nose, in the end, and her sense of the sloping ground. She had traveled this way once before, many years ago, when the horse had first established a trading post in Winter Runner lands and her father had taken a hunting party to go and impress them. She had been too young to step back then, denied all these clues to help her find her way, but she had still possessed eyes and a mind sharp enough to remember. Now she could analyze those memories, and know she must scent out running water, for the horse had made their camp on the banks of the Sand Pearl River. Even such meager clues were enough to guide her to where she wanted to go. When there was smoke on the air, she turned away from it. Since leaving the Winter Runners, she had not seen anything that wore a human shape except the snake priest, and the more she looked on him, the less sure she was that he was entirely human. Seeing him in daylight had been a shock, because he had hardly any more color to him than he had under the moon. She had not seen him close up when her father had brought him in, and memory had smudged the edges of her recollection. Now she saw that his skin really was white, as though all the blood and color had been drained from him, save where old tattoos crossed his sunken cheeks and high forehead, faded diamonds of orange and purple making a snakeskin trail that led across to his covered scalp. His eyes were almost colorless, the skin around them pinkish and unhealthy looking. She had never seen eyes so wide and round before. They looked as though, should he ever be truly surprised by something, they would pop from their sockets entirely. They had stopped to let her rest and to eat a little more of their dwindling provisions. Seeing her critical regard, he smiled thinly. You must see few travelers share in the north. I cannot imagine why. She looked disdainful at that, especially as the crown of the world was not north. North was the highlands and the mountains, the bare and the cold. North was the Crystal Valley people of the stories, so beautiful that no traveler who saw them ever wished to return home. We have the horse, she pointed out. He looked quite different from the horse people, though, and for a moment she felt very small when thinking on how far he must have walked to reach the lands of the wolf. And what a wasted journey, in that case! But, after all, if not for him, where would she herself be? Perhaps he had been sent by wolf or tiger, or by some greater invisible power that had chosen to meddle in her life. He was carefully adjusting the cloth about his head, pulling the strips tighter, but his pale eyes were smiling still. Rested and warm, she could hardly equate him with the desperate creature of that previous night, who had begged her to carry him. You have a plan, of course, he observed. For when you reach wherever you wish the horse to take you. She did not rise to the bait. No, she had no plan. Or rather, the plan was just a way, and any finer details would have to wait. Why do you rap your head? Always better to turn the questions back on him. Have you heard it? He gave her an amused look. History and reverence. You have a lot of words that say nothing. She put her hands on her hips, wondering if she should demand proper answers, or else refuse to carry him in the pack again. He gave a croak of laughter. Stone River's daughter, you are a fierce huntress. Will you track down all my old man's habits and tear out their poor throats? His words were still soft, but the edges where his teeth should have shaped them, but he was working hard on compensating for the loss. A serpent dwells under the ground everywhere. So we hide ourselves likewise. To go bareheaded under the sun where our God cannot would be disrespectful. If your serpent is under this ground, he is frozen. She was not sure why exactly she wanted to dent his comfortable composure, but the urge was strong in her. No doubt you are right. Her words glanced off him and left no wound, but they left him thoughtful nonetheless. I am a long way from home, and though I know that he is with me, that he moves in the earth, even here, sometimes it is hard. His next smile was touched with pain. Perhaps we should be on our way. She followed the scent and sound of fresh water until she found one of the innumerable streams that laced the crown of the world like filigree. Running alongside the water took her to what she guessed must be the little sand pearl, a swift flowing river still fierce and angry after its journey from the highlands before it joined its big sister. Her best judgment had taken her downstream, and now she was rewarded with a tangle of smoke from a score of fires and the unmistakable sight of the horse trading post. Actually seeing it there, a testament to her impromptu navigation, gave her a sudden surge of hope. She was just a girl, a pup, a cub, and yet she had traveled for 2 days on fleet paws and found herself arriving exactly at the target she had set. Which of her father's hunters could have accomplished the same? Almost all of them, came her own caustic response. But she shook it off, bounding along the sand pearl's banks with fresh energy. I will sleep under cover tonight, and in my human form, she told herself. Save for brief rests and the odd word with the old serpent, she had held to the wolf's form almost entirely. And we will get food and warmer clothes. For the air was just starting to fill with falling snow, and she was starting to feel the chill through her pelt and the clothes inhered beneath it. And Hesprec will make them take us away from here, she thought. And then, to get out from under the wolves' shadow, that was enough. What choices there were she would make as a free woman and without her father's heavy hand twisting her course. The Horse Society post was not like anything else in the crown of the world. They did not raise hills to build on. Instead, there was a wooden wall of stakes encircling their compound, with a gap opening on to the river and another, opposite, on to the land. Within, the horse had built round houses of sticks that were set up on stilts high enough that, as a child, she had crawled under one. Although the walls would plainly allow the horsemen to defend what they had, the effect of the whole was curiously meek and unimposing. Without a grand earthen mound, such as the least of the wolf dwellings was set up on, the trading post did not dominate the landscape, but seemed almost to hide in it. Despite all that heavy wood and the work and time invested in the construction, the trading post had a curiously temporary air, as though the horse might at any time simply pack it up and haul it elsewhere. Outside the walls were a motley assortment of tents and the smoking remains of campfires. She remembered there being more when she had traveled here as a child, but, with winter coming on, the itinerant traders of this land would be heading home, whether they had obtained what they sought or not. By the time she had trotted closer, the snow was thickening and the air had grown cold enough that she wondered if even the swift sand pearl might see some ice. She walked between the tents cautiously, spotting almost nobody. The traders themselves would no doubt be hurrying to conclude their business within the palisade, and their wives and hearth husbands had laced the tents shut against the weather. Nobody stopped her from entering the trading post, although she drew plenty of looks as people satisfied themselves that she was stepped, and not some bold little animal come in from the woods to steal a supper. Although that may yet be necessary. She was aware that, no matter how much she had excelled so far, she would now be at the mercy of her companion. She had nothing to barter, or nothing she was willing to barter, that might gain her anything from the traders of the Horse Society. She slunk around the wall of the nearest propped-up house until she was out of the wind and the worst of the snow. Stepping into her true shape meant immediately feeling the bite of the cold as her fur was stripped away. Shivering a little, she placed her pack on the ground and prodded it with her foot until the snake reluctantly emerged. For a moment, the little reptile just coiled in upon himself, writhing against the chill, but before he could grow sluggish, Hesprec Essenskis stepped out from its twisting loops and hugged himself, mouth twisted in a toothless grimace. "You're glad we're heading off south now, aren't you?" Maniye told him grimly. He managed to raise a smile even then. "Shave me from women who must always be right." He took a deep breath, and the following exhalation plumed on the air. "Let us seek out some dignitary of the horse and petition him. At the least, let us hope they offer us the hospitality of a roof, even if it is just for as long as our words with them last." There were still a few people about despite the snow, and they quickly found a couple of coyote traders heading back for their tents, satchels bulging with whatever the horse had bartered to them. The coyote were a familiar sight all over the crown of the world, mocked as a tribe that would be wolves if only they could. Still, Coyote himself was a clever trickster, and his people survived the winters and the wolves' disdain equally well. Hesprec held out a hand to attract their attention, bringing it back vertically to his lips in an odd, ritual gesture that must have been a habit of his homeland. The two coyote men stared at the mismatched pair and exchanged glances. Maniye was uncomfortably aware that they probably thought she was the old man's thrall, or worse. Hunched in his borrowed sheepskin jacket, Hesprec asked them for directions without ever really speaking, his hands talking for him, and one of the traders singled out a hut with a jab of his finger. In the flurrying snow, they could see little of the place but a shadow, so they worked their way around its curving wall until they found the 3 layers of hung skins that were keeping the weather out. Inside it was absurdly warm, the heat of a central fire combining with the bodies of almost 20 people to make the air thick and heavy with the reek of sweat. There was barely room there for 2 more, even a skinny girl and a skinnier old man. But, with a little shoving and some half-hearted curses, they managed to get themselves inside with the furs falling closed behind them. Most of the press were outsiders, here for the last few days of the trading season. She saw plenty more coyotes, short, thick-set men and women who could have passed for wolf if only they'd strutted more. Most of them had peeled back their clothes and were sitting relishing the fire, with sweat glistening on their skin. Maniye saw a couple playing a game she knew, bones balanced on the backs of their hands and then flipped up for catching, or perhaps to seek a glimpse of the future in the way they fell. One pair, a man and a woman, were entwined in an embrace, fumbling ardently despite the spectators. She saw a couple of crows down from the eyrie, small, wiry men who were the only friendly ambassadors those heights produced. Each had half his face painted or tattooed with intricate curling patterns of black, and they stared at the newcomers using one eye at a time, tilting their heads to either side, just like birds. There was a raised platform at the far end of the hut, and it was up there that the horse were conducting their business. There was a man up there who seemed to be in charge, broad-shouldered and broader-waisted, and yet probably as tall as Hesprec if he stood. He wore a thin beige robe of some material she didn't know, certainly not the wool she was used to. It was richly ornamented at the hems with stitching of many colors, and she thought it was one of the finest garments she had ever laid eyes on. Above it, around his neck, was a torque of copper, polished to gleam in the firelight. The sight of it made her uncomfortable, too much like the halters that thralls wore to prevent them stepping. The metal did not meet at the front, and was presumably a symbol of rank and importance, but she could not shake the feeling that there was a touch of servitude there, even so. There was a horsewoman sitting up there behind him, dressed more plainly in a long woolen shirt, and she was making marks in a clay tablet to tally whatever the man was bargaining for, and occasionally interrupting to give her opinion. She had the same coppery skin as all the horse people, with a pointed face and a curved nose, and Maniye thought she looked very exotic and elegant. She had heard the Winter Runner men talk often about the grace and beauty of horsewomen. Another of the horse had hopped down from the platform as soon as they came in, and he kicked and pushed his way through the gathered throng to speak to them. He was long-boned and much younger than the hetman doing the bargaining, enough to be the wide man's son, and he wore a jerkin of hard leather scales over a wool robe that fell to his knees. Like all the horse she had ever seen, he had a calm strength to him that went beyond merely his strong frame. His eyes were flecked and tawny, like polished stones. His attention skipped from one to the other, resting mostly on Hesprec and plainly not sure what to make of him. "You come to trade?" he asked, a flick of his gaze taking in their other visitors. "What goods have you?" It was only through hearing his voice, and the strangeness of the way he spoke, that Maniye noticed the absence of anything similar in Hesprec. For all his odd choices of words, the snake spoke as though he had been born to the crown of the world, except now, when he matched the horseman's accent perfectly. "Special goods for those heading south before the ice comes. A trade that comes along once in 2 span of years." Hesperic's smile was broad, but, without teeth, it could never quite aspire to looking friendly. Still, he did his best. The tall horseman gave him a doubting look. "You may be best to come next morning with your special trading, white one. There are many here to barter before you." His eyes moved to Maniye again, and he surprised her with a smile. "But our fire is warm. I offer that to you, at least." And then he was striding and shoving his way to return to the platform. Up there, their chief was just concluding a trade, finishing with some grinning remark that had the coyote woman opposite laughing. Evidently a good deal for all concerned. As she hopped down and began to make her way towards the door, the tall man clambered up and had a murmured word with his superior. The man in the torque seemed to doubt him, but then looked over and caught sight of Hesprec with almost exaggerated surprise. Maniye felt his eyes as they shifted to her and stayed there longer than she was happy with. With a few words and a gesture, the hetman had sent his man back down to Hesprec and Maniye. "It seems you're more special than you think," he explained, a little exasperated by this turn of events. Come with me." He reached upwards, and Maniye saw that there were struts overhead that projected out from where the walls met the eaves, sloping up along the line of the roof, but leaving a gap where various bundles had been stowed. From there, the tall horse dragged down a heavy leather coat trimmed with fur and pulled it about himself. "The trading master wants to speak about this special trade of yours, but somewhere better fit for it. Come with me." They struggled out into the snow again, which was now settling steadily. Hurrying almost on the heels of their guide, neither Maniye nor Hesprec were in any position to watch out around them, nor did they have any animal senses to call on. From between two of the horses' round huts, a wolf watched them, pale enough to be almost invisible in the snow, save for the darker fur about his shoulders. Narrowing his eyes next against the thickening flakes, Broken Axe considered his next move. So that concludes chapter number 9. And since we can't leave you hanging there, let's hop into chapter number 10. The hut they were led to was smaller and empty, with the embers of a central fire retaining just enough warmth for comfort. A raised platform furthest from the door bore a mess of furs and woolen blankets for sleeping on. The tall young horseman clasped his hands together before him. It meant nothing to her, but Hesprec echoed the gesture. I am Alliday, hand-son of the trading master Ganris, who directs all you see, the horse announced, although he wore a slightly complicit expression, as if to say, yes, grand words, for so little. Maniye found herself warming to him, perhaps just because he was the first person to show them some kindness. I am Hesprec Eshinskish, priest of the serpent, and one who has traveled far, perhaps too far. The old man spoke with a careful dignity that Maniye knew was to hide his ravaged gums. Again, his accent matched that of the man he was speaking to. My hand, father, wishes to speak with you without many ears to hear. I shall find you food and drink and all else you might require. Again he brought his hands together, and then he was backing out of the hut. All that time his attention had been only on Hesprec, but his eyes sought out Maniye just as he was leaving, and she thought she caught a smile in them. What is a hand, son? She wondered aloud. He had almost thought she'd said handsome at first. He will not be of this Ganrish's blood, but adopted into his family. In the horse they do all things their own way. Hesprec was sending bird-like glances about the interior of the hut, and now he hobbled over and sat on the platform, drawing one of the furs about him. Maniye frowned. They take care of the orphaned. Who does not? No, no, they buy them. Seeing her expression, the old man cackled. The horse buy children. Some say steal them, but this I do not believe. It can be a good life to be of the horse. When there is no food, where a child might die otherwise, sometimes it is done to sell them to the horse. But when they learn to step? Hesprec shook his head. There are ways, rituals. You know this, surely? They sever them from their totems, then find them new horse souls, so that they become horse tribe in truth. He said it very matter-of-factly, but many cringed at the thought. That's horrible! How can they? What is sin here that makes us us? It survives the loss of the soul. It is only if no new soul comes that there is danger. The old horse is generous. It has many souls to spare, no doubt. The old man stared at her pensively. Wolf girl, tiger girl, you must know that you, too, will have to wield that knife. For a terrible moment she thought he meant he would sell her to the horse. Then, more terrible still, she understood. She had two warring souls within her. One day soon she would have to sever one and cast it away. Tiger or wolf? It was the choice that had lurked in ambush for her since the day she was born. I don't want to, she began stubbornly, hopelessly. Hesprec opened his mouth to say something, whether reassuring or prescriptive, she did not know, but the words failed him, and he said nothing. Pity looked wholly out of place on his pallid countenance. Then Alliday was back, ducking into the hut to spread out another skin by the fire. On it he placed leather bowls, berries, dried meat, quamash meal. His big, long-fingered hands worked with exaggerated delicacy. Please, eat, he invited them. My hand, father, is coming. Maniye had hoped he himself would stay, but he was already on his way out, backwards again with his hands clasped together. This time she mimicked the gesture. She had a berry halfway to her mouth when the broad man, Ganris, arrived. Welcome to my home, he boomed. Greetings, strange travelers with special trades to make. He was so loud he seemed to fill the whole hut. You, grandfather, may the sun warm your bones! And you, little daughter, swift be your hunting, and let the winter smile on you! His congratulatory smile was more for himself, Maniye felt, for so thoroughly putting his guests in their place. He wasted no time in sitting down by the food, one hand already reaching for it without the need to look. From somewhere he produced a skin of something, and he unlaced it and took an ostentatious sniff at the contents. It turned out to be goat milk when it reached Maniye, although warmed and spiced with something. Once she had tried it, she was highly reluctant to surrender it back to Ganris. Hesprec, for his part, had taken the tiniest sip, just enough to be a good guest, before passing it on. Now, speak of your special trading, Ganris invited them. Out of the respect I have for the Sun River Nation and its revered priesthood, I will listen. Out of the respect I have for the horse society and its traditions, which is no less, I shall speak, Hesprec agreed, twisting his thin lips to get the words right. Winter has come to the crown of the world, as all can see. This is no time for the civilized and the sensible to let themselves freeze here. You must be ready to travel south for the plains, and two such as we would hardly slow you, on land or water. It would be a grand honor to travel with the horse. Ganris nodded self-importantly, his manner indicating that such would indeed be a grand honor for them. I would hesitate to inflict the hardship of our travels on two so distinguished travelers. No doubt you would find our ways coarse, our hospitality mean, compared to what you are used to. He took in Hesprec's mismatched clothing, and the general feel of dirt and weariness that hung over the pair of them. We are hardy. We will endure, Hesprec replied unflappably. And this is not all, surely? Ganris prompted. Two such as you would not trouble yourselves for such a meager matter. The old man took a deep breath, and in it Maniye saw just how tired he was. Her feet had carried them here from the winter runners, but the sheer effort of talking was wearing him down. We would impose on your hospitality for new clothing, perhaps, and I am sure the matter of provisions need not even be discussed. So sumptuous are your riches. Sumptuous! Ganris rolled the word over his tongue, plainly pleased with the new acquisition. But the gratitude of the priesthood of the Sun River Nation would no doubt put what little aid we can render into shadow. Maniye felt a tightness within her. Now they were talking about what Hesprec had to bargain with. That had always been the hole in their plan. If the old man was as ragged and wretched as he looked, then they might as well barter for the sun and the moon as for some new clothes and passage south. Opulence, Hesprec said precisely, shall be yours when you return this son of the south to the serpent's coils. And the girl too? Abruptly, the florid-speaking Ganrus was gone, and someone shrewd and calculating was in his place. Does he think I'm a slave? Maniye thought, tense and growing tenser, tiger and wolf both clamoring to rise up and reshape her. Will he offer to buy me? And then, would Hesprec sell me? After all, she had traveled with the old man for just a few days. She did not know him. She could not trust him. The girl, too, Hesprec agreed firmly. She is not of the south, Ganrus observed. Her soul has flown far from its last resting place, the old man revealed. Why else would one such as I travel so, save to return to my home a soul dear to the serpent that has been born into the cold jaws of the wolf? He said it with utter assurance. Ganrus, finding the skin back in his hands, took a deep draught from it. Remarkable! He gasped at the end. Such are the ways of souls. Even a priest such as I cannot be said to understand all things. Hesprec managed his thin smile. Can we be said to have a bargain? Ganrus's mouth twisted. The gratitude of priests, he prompted. Gold, jade, obsidian, greater than all of these is the gratitude of the serpent for those that restore one of his own. And the girl? We are inseparable, Hesprec confirmed politely. Ganrus nodded, then stood up smoothly, rising from crossed legs despite the bulk of him. Well, I am only a humble trading master, barely hetman in anything but name. I must speak to my people and plead your case, to persuade them that our journey south shall be observed by strangers. The serpent's eyes are hooded. He sees only that which is wise, Hesprec pronounced, overly mystically in Maniye's opinion. Even so! Ganrus did the same thing with his hands as Alade had, and then he backed out. Maniye locked eyes with Hesprec, studying him just as he was studying her. Amayin Shatterzoak was one of the Winter Runner's greatest hunters, and, for that, she was bitter. Though Smiles Without Teeth might be stronger, and Hair Killer might be fleeter, there were few who could so claim to have all the gifts of a hunter in one body. Perhaps there was none. In her human form she was stocky and powerful, her bristling dark hair cut close to her scalp to afford no purchase for grasping fingers. As a wolf, she was the equal of any of them in size and ferocity. Stepping could be a great equalizer. Yet she would never be chief of the Winter Runners. She could prove herself as good as any man, or twice as good, and the honor would still be barred her. That was what had made her grind her teeth. She had sons, though. The honors denied to her, she could still secure for them. She had taught them ambition and patience, how to stalk with care, then to seize the prize in their jaws and not let go. And sons were something Akrit did not have, take as many wives as he liked. Only one woman had borne his get, and he'd had her killed the moment the squalling creature was pulled from her womb. Amiens was willing to wager he was regretting that now. She had two sons, two more than Stone River would ever have. Roubre was the elder, not the best of hunters, and yet to earn a name for himself. But he was blessed with a dogged determination to see things through, and already had a following of young hunters. Her younger son, Irame Arrowtaker, had earned his name after he had gone off into the highlands to take a tiger skin, and come back with a shaft in his leg to mark his recklessness. He had learned little from the experience, to Amiens' frustration. Least of all, that enthusiasm was no substitute for planning and forethought. It was to cure him of his foolishness that she had brought him here with her. Rumor amongst the traders placed the girl here, or at least identified the old snake, who was more easily spotted. She could not have said what prompted her to take Irame and run swift pawed all the way to the trading post. One of those decisions she made mid-hunt, little hunches and suspicions leading her to an elusive quarry. And now the quarry was Akrit's own daughter. Now there was a hunt worth exerting herself for. If only the girl could be mated to one of Amiens' sons, that would solve so many problems. Akrit had scoffed at the idea when she had brought it up, though. He had other plans, it seemed. Any man who became Maniye's mate would be in a strong place to become chief after Stone River. Amiens had no interest in anyone gaining such an advantage over her own brood when the time came. The horse trading master was all polite niceties at first, committing himself to nothing, asking for a more detailed description of the girl, Maniye. Then, at last, the fat man was admitting to having some heard of the rumor, perhaps seen some glimpse? Yes, they had been here. Yes, perhaps they were still here. He did not know. Except that he did know. He was just trying to find a way to betray a guest without sullying the horse honor. In the end, he had said nothing, yet, at the same time, told her everything. Amiens stood up and stretched, tugging at the collar of her hide jerkin to show she was too hot, and ducked outside with Irame patting at her heels. "Did you mean what you said?" Maniye asked, after letting the silence between them stretch out as long as it could without snapping. Hesprec cocked an eye at her and said nothing. "You said," she went on, "that you came all the way here, to the crown of the world, for me, because of my soul." In the face of his closed lips, the words tumbled out of her. "And why would you be here? Why travel so far? And you're a priest, a magician. You might see—" She was disgusted by the hope in her own voice. Would some southern madness result in everything she had done, all those lonely years of childhood, gaining a significance and justification it had always lacked? Until that moment, she had never quite realized that such a hole existed in her. But Hesprec was just shaking his head slowly. "I am sorry, Maniye. It was just a story." "You're lying!" She was clinging to a sinking boat just one moment longer. "It was simply something to say to the question Ganrish asked me. I apologize if my powers of invention have misled you. And while I cannot claim any grand destiny led me to you, believe me when I say I am very, very grateful that blind fortune nonetheless did." Then Alliday was thrusting his way back into the hut with a sack over his shoulder. "Get up!" he ordered them tersely. You have to leave here. He upended the bag and shook loose a wad of bundled clothing. Get these on. They will warm you more than what you have. Especially you, old serpent. There were fleece-lined sheepskin robes there, and fur hats and boots, all fashioned in the horse style. None of it fitted overly well, too large on Maniye, while too short and too wide on Hesprec, but they donned them hastily. There was a bag of food, too, dried fruit, nuts, and shreds of meat jerky, all mixed together. What is going on? The snake priest asked mildly as he pulled on a boot. The winter runners are here in the camp, Alliday told them tersely. They are seeking you. You are our guests. Every line of his body was urging them to hurry. We do not take sides, and we do not know why they want you, and we do not want to be a part of a war within the Winter Runners, still less some business between them and the South. So, we clothe you, we invite you to leave. We tell them you were here, but, gone, now. Who could have thought it? And then? Maniye asked him. They track you, they do not track you. They catch you, or they do not catch you, he said. But it is not here inside our walls that it happens. Our duty as hosts is not breached. For what value I can give my wishes, I hope you stay a step ahead, all the way to where you are going. And, perhaps, if this turns out to be the right thing to do, you will remember your friends of the Horse Society in a better year. And where should we go? She demanded. How can I say? He shrugged. But downriver in Swiftback lands there is a larger trading post, big enough that we keep people there all year. For a moment, Maniye wanted to be angry at him, but she saw that it could just as easily have been Akrit's hunters bursting in on them, and that would probably have been the safer course for Ganris's people. And Alliday seemed sincere when he wished them well. She could read in him that he wanted to do more, but he was caught by the bonds that laced him to his people and his hand-father. We will go, agreed Hesprec. He was fully attired now. Perhaps the two of them could even have walked through the trading post and passed as horse people, with the falling snow to shadow their features. Their disparate heights would betray them, though. Such a small girl, such a tall, gangling man. Too suspicious not to draw a closer look. There was only one way to go. In the bag, old serpent, she instructed, far more bravely than she felt. Hesprec stepped into that same reptile form and slithered into her satchel, and she slung it over her shoulders. Our thanks, she told Alliday. My thanks. He nodded soberly. Swift roads and fair forage. And then, and look out for us in the spring. Then she had shifted her own form, reducing down to that small wolf that lived within her, tugging at the bag's strap with her teeth to tighten it. And there was nothing more for it but to nose past the hanging furs and out into the same snow that must even now be falling on Akrit's hunters as they searched for her. For a moment, surrounded by the scents and structures of men, she could not get her bearings. No idea which way was north, which south. All her wolf senses bewildered. Then she found the river that the trading post was built against, cluttered with the log rafts and canoes that the Horse Society would soon use to carry themselves and their goods south for the winter. South was where she needed to go, too, and for a moment she paused at the water's edge, cringing back from the boats of the horsemen and women who were already loading tightly bundled packages on their own boats. Should she leap aboard and find some place to hide herself? But the horsemen had not given Hesprec their agreement. She would be like a thief, uninvited and outside any protection of hospitality. She could be dumped in the river as quick as thought once they discovered her, and all their fair dealings with Alliday, their talk with Ganris, would mean nothing. She did not know these people well enough, nor could she trust them. She would have consulted with the old snake if she could, but he was coiled inside her pack, and she did not dare take her human form. Not now she was being hunted. There was no escape here, save the water, and that was cold and swift enough to be more than a match for her ability to swim it. Mind made up, she was darting off, heading for the landward gate of the trading post. Everything was a shadow in the swirling snow until she came within a few yards of it. Save for the laboring horse people, there was nobody abroad, and she hoped that any of Akrit's people were similarly resting out the weather under horse society roofs. She dodged and scrabbled around the curved walls of the horse huts, hunting for the way out into the open. She spotted the other wolf, all too late. He had been waiting patiently, standing quite still as though he had somehow known she must come this way. She was going fast enough that she almost ran straight past him, within reach of his jaws. As it was, she scrabbled and slipped in the piling snow, skidding over onto her side as she desperately tried to stop. He stared at her, head high. She recognized him. Man or beast, she would know Broken Axe. Her guts turned to ice within her, and for a moment she could not move, shocked rigid with fear as he began to step calmly forwards, lifting his feet fastidiously to reach over the drifts. Her eyes, pale and clear as no wolf of the wilds would own to, lanced into her, and her mind was flailing frantically, wondering whether he would seize her in his jaws or step into his lean, hard human body with axe already in hand. Something broke inside her. Either she fought down her fear or it consumed her utterly, but she was on her feet, under his very nose, and launching herself off, one of her rear feet raking a claw across his muzzle as he lunged forwards. She zigged and zagged, hoping to gain enough distance that the snow would lose her. She felt no breath at her heels, and guessed that he was already trying to flank her, to head her off, and that he would appear before her any moment, lunging out of the weather like a nightmare. She dashed around the wall of another hut, seeing an openness before her that she hoped was the gate, and an arm caught her about the throat, dragging her off her feet, tight enough around her neck that she was ripped straight into her human form, hauled kicking and yelling into the wind shadow of the hut. Something cold pressed at her cheek. She knew it for iron instantly. No child of the wolf would not. The long, narrow chill of a knife blade. "If it is not Stone River's child," a woman's voice said softly in her ear. Stripped of the speed of her wolf shape, Maniye was suddenly terrified in a quite different way. Worse, even, than almost running into Broken Axe's open jaws. Her human hide seemed far more fragile and vulnerable than any animal's, and with the arm close about her neck, she could not step away, like a thrall wearing a collar. Another wolf crossed her view, not Broken Axe, but a young male, and a moment later she recognized his slightly awkward loping as that of Arrowtaker, Amiens Shatters Oak's youngest, which meant that the voice and the arm belonged to... "Amiens," she got out. "Please." No more than that, for what could she say? What did she have to barter with, after all? Yet still the hopeless words emerged. "Not back to my father, please." The huntress chuckled in her ear. "Is that your last true wish, Stone River's child?" The knife moved, just a minor readjustment, but it had all of Maniye's attention. Abruptly the edge of it was at her throat. "But he—" Her world lost what little balance it had left. Through all of this, she had been convinced of one thing. The fate she was fleeing was that described to her by drunken Akrit that evening after the testing. She was fleeing Broken Axe. She was fleeing her part in her father's plan to use her to somehow bludgeon the tiger into his service. What she had not thought she was fleeing was death itself. Oh, death for Hesprec, certainly, but he had been staring that in the face already. Death for herself had never been a possibility. Until now. "Oh, your father will not be chief forever," came Amiens' sharp-edged voice. "Your father has no son, Stone River's daughter. But he has you, and while he has you, who knows what might happen after he is gone? But without you—" Maniye actually felt the steeling of the muscles that was Amiens drawing together the will to kill her chief's flesh and blood. She was not the only one. Something thin and hissing reared furiously past her shoulder, striking with gaping jaws at Amiens' face. The huntress shrieked, fearing the venom, no room in her head for the memory that the old serpent had been thoroughly defanged. She fell back with her hands out to shield herself, her head striking hard against the wooden side of the hut, and the knife falling away. The arm was gone from about her neck, and Maniye stepped instantly, racing past Irame and away, feeling and shifting the sliding weight that was Hesprec being jolted back into her pack. The gate was ahead, and she bolted for it, seeing Irame's sleek furred form at the edge of her vision as he moved in on her flank with fangs bared to bite. She shied away from him, feeling his teeth catch at her fur. He was forcing her away from the gate, even if he could not get his fangs in her. Amiens must be close behind. In their stepped shapes, with their blood up, they would tear her apart. Then he was gone with a yelp, tripped or stumbling, and she dashed ahead and out, beyond the palisade and into the furious teeth of the snow. But still, better that than the teeth of the winter runners. Amiens had been a handful of heartbeats behind, just a few moments reeling from the knock to her head, stepped back into wolf form, but still groggy. When she got to the gate, there he was, and she felt a terrible, ripping sensation within her. Her child, her youngest, her reckless Irame. He lay, human, curled into a ball, and the snow about him was melting red with his blood. He was still alive, just, shivering and shuddering. Maniye had torn open his leg, the inside near the groin where the blood ran fierce. Amiens had seen enough people and animals die to know it. She crouched beside him, on human knees now, feeling dead and cold in her heart. The loss was like a hammer raised, waiting to come down and spark her rage. Mother! He clutched for her, but she drew back, shaking her head. It was very, very important. Irame, listen to me! You must step! You must! Mother, it hurts. Please. And he was twisting, trying to reach out for what comfort she could offer, despite the agony. She wanted desperately to gather him in her arms, but she needed him to obey her this one last time, for his own sake. My son, listen to me! Her voice shook with the same erratic rhythms as his ravaged body. Irame, son, please! You lived within the jaws of the wolf, so you must end! Please, Irame, please, this one last time! Tears left freezing trails down her cheeks. She could see Irame fighting for another breath, another heartbeat. Mother. She opened her mouth and knew that no words would come out, that it would be a sound of grief and loss, and all the more so if he died like this. And then the dying boy was a dying beast, whimpering and trembling, stepped at last into the form that all wolves must hope to hold to as they passed away. To die human was to deny the soul its exit, to trap it within the decaying corpse. Thus were ghosts made, tormented and twisted spirits denied rebirth. Now she went to him and cradled his wolf's body in her arms, whispering in his ear, telling him it would be well, that he would live again, be born again, as man or as beast. Her words jumped and shuddered with her grief and his faltering breath. The girl would be getting further away, she knew, and the snow would hide her tracks. This was more important, though. Family always came first. But even if she lost the trail now, she would find Stone River's daughter over winter, or in the spring, or in 20 years of searching, and she would tear open that girl's throat and gorge on her blood. In her arms, Irame faded at last, and she felt that moment when the soul fled from him. In that instant she had stepped, because human grief was shallow and pale compared to the grieving of a wolf. She flung back her head and howled out the incandescence of her anguish and her fury. And that concludes chapter 10 of The Tiger and the Wolf. Pretty intense stuff. Maniye and Hesprec are just trying to hang out with the horse, maybe get a free trip back to the south, and they get attacked, not only by Broken Axe, but by Amiens. And Emian's son ends up dying as a result. Shouldn't mess with that Maniye girl. She's tough. So next week, same time, same place, we will be reading the next couple of chapters of The Tiger and the Wolf. So I look forward to see you then. And until then, enjoy your weekend. Bye now.